This is Kathleen Drew, Chair of the Washington State Energy Facility Site Evaluation, calling our August meeting to order. Ms. Grantham, will you call the roll?
Department of Commerce, Department of Ecology, Fish and Wildlife,
Mike Livingston here.
Department of Natural Resources,
Lenny Young, present.
Utilities and Transportation Commission,
Stacey Brewster, present.
Local Government and Optional State Agencies for the Horse Heaven Project, Department of Agriculture.
Dave Sharp,
present.
Oh, Dave, you are for Benton County Watoma Solar. I will get to you in a second.
Oh, that's right. Yep, gotcha.
For Horse Heaven for Benton County, Ed Brost.
Ed Brost is here.
I don't believe we heard Department of Agriculture.
Derek Sanderson, present.
Thank you.
Thank you. For the Badger Mountain Project, Douglas County.
Jordan Julio, present.
For the Watoma Solar Project, Benton County, Dave Sharp.
Dave Sharp, present.
Thank you. Washington State Department of Transportation.
Paul Gonseth, present.
The Assistant Attorney General.
John Thompson, present.
Administrative Law Judges, Adam Torum.
Present.
Laura Bradley.
Present.
Dan Gerard.
Present.
For EFSEC staff, Sonia Bumpus.
Present.
Amy Hofkemeyer.
Present.
Amy Moon.
Amy Moon, present.
Joe Wood.
Joe Wood, present.
Patty Betts. Stu Henderson.
Here.
Joan Owens.
Here.
Dave Walker.
Present.
For the operational updates, Kittitas Valley Wind Project.
Eric Melbart, present.
Wild Horse Wind Power Project.
Jennifer Galbraith, present.
Grays Harbor Energy Center.
Chris Sharon is present.
Chehalis Generation Facility.
Stefano Schnicker, present.
Columbia Generating Station.
Marshall Schmidt, present.
Columbia Solar.
Owen Hurd, present.
And for the Council for the Environment.
This is Megan Salome, present.
Thank you. Chair, there is a quorum for the regular council for the Horse Heaven, Badger Mountain, and Watoma councils. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next item is the proposed agenda. You see it before us. Council members, is there a motion to adopt the proposed agenda?
This is Mike Livingston. I propose to adopt the agenda as presented.
Thank you. Second?
Stacey Brewster, second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to the minutes. We have one set of minutes before us today, and that's the meeting minutes from July 19th, 2022. Is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes for July 19th, 2022?
This is Stacey Brewster. I'll move that we approve the minutes from the July 19th, 2022 meeting.
Thank you. Second?
Mike Livingston, second.
Thank you. Before we vote, I do have two corrections on page 14, line 11. Undated should be dated. And same on page 14, line 14. PAC, P-A-C-K, should be capital T, capital A, capital C. I believe that's a TAC, a Technical Advisory Committee meeting. Those are the corrections I have. Are there any other corrections? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes as amended, please say aye.
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 Thank you. All those opposed? Minutes are approved. Moving on to our operational updates. Kittitas Valley Wind Project, Mr. Melbardis.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew, EFSEC Council and staff. This is Eric Melbardis with EDP Renewables for the Kittitas Valley Wind Power Project. We had nothing non-routine to report for the period.
Thank you. I do have a question, Mr. Melbardis.
Yes.
Recently, there have been some fires, but I think quite a bit to the east of you in Kittitas Valley. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. In fact, I'm out there, pulled over on the side of the road in the middle of where one of the fires came through, just east of Wild Horse. Did not affect any of our operations. In fact, our smoke levels have not been high yet this year.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Moving on to Wild Horse Wind Power Project, Ms. Galbraith.
Yes, thank you, Chair Drew, council members and staff. For the record, this is Jennifer Galbraith representing Puget Sound Energy for the Wild Horse Wind Facility. I have only one non-routine update for the month of July, and that is the annual update for the Technical Advisory Committee. Due to increasing COVID case counts, the annual update was provided to TAC members via email. In addition, there were no proposed actions that required an in-person meeting or TAC decision. The update was very brief and included the change of the EFSEC TAC facilitator from Kyle Overton to Amy Moon. No questions or comments were received from TAC members. I also wanted to provide an update on the Vantage Highway fire. Sounds like Eric is nearby. The wildfire started on August 1st, shortly after 12 p.m. It started along the roadside of the Vantage Highway, just a couple of miles east of the Wild Horse site entrance. It started during red flag weather conditions. Warm temperatures with very low humidity and strong winds combined to produce extreme fire behavior. Additional resources were required to suppress the fire as it continued to grow rapidly. A Washington State Department of Natural Resources Type 3 incident management team took command of the fire on August 4th and soon after transitioned to a Type 2 incident management team equipped with more resources. A total of 154 fire personnel were responding to the fire and using Wild Horse as a staging area. The fire initially moved east toward the Columbia River, then changed directions back west up the drainages toward the wind farm. Some areas of the town of Vantage were under level 3 evacuations, but were scaled back to level 2 in about an hour. PSE self-evacuated site personnel from Wild Horse and closed the visitor center. The Quillamine and Wiskedick Wildlife Area units within the LT Murray Wildlife Area located east of the wind farm were temporarily closed to protect public safety. And a total of 30,659 acres of shrub steppe habitat was burned, and 1 cabin and 3 outbuildings were burned at Scammons Landing, located on the banks of the Columbia River. The fire did reach the wind farm on the eastern boundary and burned up to one of our turbine access roads, at which point fire personnel were able to contain the fire. The gravel turbine access road acted as a fire break, preventing the fire from expanding further. Approximately 50 acres were burned within the Wild Horse site boundary. There was no fire damage to wind turbines or associated infrastructure. And as of August 11th, The fire was 100% contained, and I believe the cause of the fire is under investigation and still undetermined at this point. And
Thank you
that's all.
for that very complete report. Are there any questions from council members? Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to the Chehalis Generation Facility operational update. Stefano Schnitger.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew, council members, and staff. Chehalis has nothing non-routine to report for the period.
Thank you. Moving on to the Grays Harbor Energy Center, the operational update, Mr. Sharon.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew, council member, staff. For the month of July, the only non-routine item I have to report is that we submitted our annual relative accuracy test audit test plan and remedial stack test plan to EFSEC, and it's actually underway as we speak.
Thank you. Moving on to our greenhouse gas mitigation plan update, Ms. Bumpus.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Sonia Bumpus. Good afternoon, Chair Drew and council members. I'm addressing the council today to discuss a request that EFSEC has received from our certificate holder, Grays Harbor Energy LLC, concerning the Grays Harbor's facility obligation to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions in light of the recent passage of the Climate Commitment Act. Karen McGaffey is here. She is the certificate holder's legal counsel, and she'll be introducing Grays Harbor's request. There is a copy of Grays Harbor's written request in the council members' packets. It's a letter dated June 6, 2022, and I believe it's Appendix 1 of the staff memo. Karen's introduction will be followed by remarks from John Thompson's EFSEC's legal counsel. John is planning to discuss some of the key takeaways from EFSEC staff's legal memo that was provided in an email to council members for their review on August 5th, 2022. After we go through these presentations, if there aren't any other questions, or if there are, and once we get past those questions, I'll proceed with staff's recommendation and a proposed action to act on the request that we've received. So with that, I will go ahead and hand this over to Karen to begin the introduction for the request.
Thank you, Sonia. Good afternoon, Chair Drew, council members and staff. My name's Karen McGaffey, and I represent Grays Harbor Energy, which, as you know, operates the Grays Harbor Energy Center. I'm here today to speak to you about Washington's Climate Commitment Act and how that statute relates to the greenhouse gas mitigation plan that applies to the Grays Harbor Energy Center. We provided EFSEC staff with a letter dated June 6th, and I know that along with the staff memorandum and a number of other materials are in your packet today. I am not going to repeat all of the details that are in that large stack of documents, but I will try to provide a brief summary to start us out. EFSEC first permitted the Grays Harbor Energy Project back in 1996. It was actually one of the first projects I worked on as a then young attorney. Since then, EFSEC's amended the site certification agreement several times. An amendment in 2001 allowed the Grays Harbor Energy to install larger turbines than had originally been proposed. But it also required that Grays Harbor Energy submit a greenhouse gas mitigation plan before the facility came online. Grays Harbor Energy did so, and the council approved that mitigation plan in 2003. The mitigation plan was loosely based on a requirement that was then in effect in Oregon and a similar mitigation requirement that the council had imposed on another project. I don't think there's any need to go into the details of the plan at this point, but in very broad terms, I'll explain that Grays Harbor Energy is required to make a payment to the Climate Trust each year for the first 30 years of its operation. The Climate Trust then uses that money to finance various greenhouse gas offset projects, and I believe your materials have a list of some of those projects in them. The amount that Grays Harbor Energy is required to pay under the plan is based on a calculation that in effect has Grays Harbor Energy paying a price per ton to offset a portion of its carbon emissions. The 2001 and 2003 plan both predated any comprehensive federal or state greenhouse gas mitigation requirement. At the time the plan was approved, we all assumed that a federal or state legislation would be enacted at some point during the effect of the plan that would establish a more comprehensive mitigation program. So the greenhouse gas mitigation plan also included a sunset provision to ensure that Grays Harbor Energy would not be required to mitigate its emissions, multiple times under multiple different programs. At this point, I believe Grays Harbor Energy is 15 years into that 30-year cycle of mitigation under the plan, and it's paid more than $5 million to the Climate Trust to implement mitigation projects. Last year, as you all know, the Washington legislature enacted the Climate Commitment Act, which required the development of an economy-wide carbon cap and invest program. And the Department of Ecology has been hard at work on various rulemakings to get that program up and running. The program will take effect January 1st, 2023. Facilities that emit more than 25,000 tons of CO2 equivalent per year are covered by the program, and they will be required to obtain allowances for all of their emissions. Grays Harbor Energy is required to comply with the Climate Commitment Act, and under this Cap and Invest program, an allowance will be required for each ton of CO2 emissions from the Grays Harbor Energy Center. I think there's more detail about this in the materials you have, but it's certainly fair to say that this obligation under the Climate Commitment Act will be much larger than the requirements of the current mitigation plan. Our request today is pretty simple. We would like EFSEC to confirm that Grays Harbor Energy's compliance with the Climate Commitment Act starting in 2023 will satisfy its obligation under the Greenhouse Gas Mitigation Plan. We hope you'll agree with the simple idea that Grays Harbor Energy should not have to pay twice for the same emissions. This is exactly the situation in which the mitigation plan's sunset provision was intended to come into play. Under the sunset provision, Grays Harbor Energy should not be required to make further payments to the Climate Trust as long as it complies with the much more substantial Climate Commitment Act. So I think I'll stop there and I think hand things over to John Thomas, but I will be happy to answer questions later if you have any.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Drew. So yeah, I was trying to think of what to add here. I think what I'll focus on is sort of the operative legal language in the documents for you to direct your attention to. As you've heard, Grays Harbor Energy is asking you to confirm that their obligations under their greenhouse gas mitigation plan should be concluded. There is language in their site certification agreement and in the language of the mitigation plan itself, which is a council approved document from 2003. It was approved by a council vote at a meeting that year, and we have, as part of the packet, the minutes of that meeting discussing its adoption. So, as Ms. McGaffey referred to, this was the occasion for adopting this plan was back in 2001 when, well, let me step back from there. In 1996, the natural gas turbine was at the SATSIP site was originally approved by the council by a site certification agreement amendment. And at that time, arguments were made by a Council for the Environment in favor of requiring greenhouse gas mitigation. But at that time, the council opted not to do so for reasons that are outlined in our memo, mostly concerns with the expenses that would be imposed on the facility operator. But then, as Ms. McGaffey was referring to, and a few years later in 2001, when a increase in the size of the facility, approval for increase in the size of the facility was requested, at that point, the council was ready to take a step toward requiring mitigation of some portion of the facility's greenhouse gases, and so required the preparation of a plan. It ends up requiring mitigation of, by one document, somewhere in the neighborhood of 21% of the emissions, and through the payments to the Climate Trust, which funds projects. The question, though, is so. In terms of what you need to look at for this request, the language of the plan itself, as I said, is relevant, as is the SCA. It talks about, there's a preemption and sunset provision that says if new state or federal law imposes requirements, on the certificate holders to limit, mitigate, or offset greenhouse gases, the climate or the council will try to get credit or to credit the certificate holder for reductions they've already achieved. That doesn't really apply here because there really is no mechanism for that under the Climate Commitment Act. But the language also says that if new state or federal law preempts this mitigation plan, then further obligations under the plan will terminate. There's kind of it's sort of unclear what preempts means, but there's kind of parallel language in the site certification agreement itself, which refers in similar terms to comprehensive federal or state mitigation program being implemented. I think if you look at those together, what it's talking about is, if that anticipated comprehensive greenhouse gas legislation comes along, then the idea was that this first step that EFSEC was making toward greenhouse gas mitigation requirements would conclude, and that if possible, that some credit would be given to the certificate holder. Although, as I said, that's not really possible under the Climate Commitment Act. So, turning to what the Climate Commitment Act requires, basically it sets a cap on emissions from covered entities in the state of Washington, which gets increasingly smaller, reducing by 90% by the year 2050. And covered entities are required to purchase emissions allowances at auction, which will likely become increasingly more valuable, therefore more expensive over time. There's the request from Grays Harbor Energy predicts that they may be somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 times more, something like 70 times more costly than what's required under the of Grays Harbor Energy under its current mitigation plan. The revenues that are generated by that auction will be used by the state of Washington to offset other sources of greenhouse gas emissions and to mitigate the effects of climate change on different communities. So in that sense, they're broadly like mitigation requirements that are required under the current greenhouse gas mitigation plan. So, in summary, we've concluded that it is reasonable to say that the Climate Commitment Act is the type of comprehensive or preemptive greenhouse gas legislation that the mitigation plan, by its terms, said would conclude or sunset the obligations of the certificate holder. And so staff's recommendation is to that it be directed to prepare a resolution for your consideration. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, this is the court reporter. I got kicked out for a second. The last part I heard you say was, we've concluded that it is reasonable to say that this Climate Commitment Act is and then I got kicked out.
Sure. So it's reasonable to conclude that the Climate Commitment Act is the type of comprehensive or preemptive greenhouse gas legislation, the site certification agreement and the greenhouse gas mitigation plan indicate would sunset or conclude the certificate holders' obligations under that plan. And so, as I was saying, and I think as Ms. Bumpus will probably further explain, staff's recommendation is to have staff prepare a resolution for the council's vote, confirming that conclusion. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Ms. Bumpus?
Thank you, Chair Drew, and thank you, John and Karen. Really appreciate your presentations on this. So just to kind of segue and picking up where John left off, so based off of staff's review of the intent of the Climate Commitment Act, what we understand about its programmatic design and how it's going to be implemented, we are finding, that the new law appears to be consistent with the type of carbon reduction regulation that EFSEC was forward thinking about it when they drafted the greenhouse gas mitigation plan with the sunset provision that John and Karen both talked about. So with that, our recommendation, the staff's recommendation, is that the council direct the staff to develop a resolution that would be voted on by the council at the next public meeting. That would be the September council meeting, confirming that Grays Harbor Energy's purchase of allowances under the Climate Commitment Act would satisfy the company's obligations under its greenhouse gas mitigation plan that we had approved in 2003.
Thank you. I'm going to ask council members if they have questions, but I have a comment and a thought first. One of the things I like best about the explanation is looking back to what the earlier council did in being thoughtful about the future and providing for different options should there be future action. I guess one of the things I'm curious about, we don't really expect this to happen, but I would also like the staff to think about including some condition if that program, the Climate Commitment Act program, would ever be reversed, so that we continue an obligation if the obligation goes away. Does that make sense?
Yes, Chair Drew, and we can certainly draft some language for the draft resolution to capture that, I think.
Great. For those of you also who are listening in and watching, you can get all these documents on our council website, and you can look at them yourselves, and we will be providing an opportunity for comments in writing based on the draft resolution. It will be out before the next meeting. So for those of you who have comments, that's when we'll be taking them. So look forward to that, and you can always communicate with our staff to ask how to comment. Other council members, do you have questions for any of the presenters on this item? I see a hand, but I don't see who it belongs to. Oh, Mr. Young, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Drew. I'd like to see the resolution also include a contingency against any type of a delay that might occur following January 1, 23, if the offset program, the mechanism under the Climate Commitment Act is not fully operational, and that might occur months or a year or two later, that Grace Harbor would continue to operate under its mitigation plan until the CCA mechanism comes online.
Okay, thank you. Other comments or questions from council members? We do have somebody who is not muted, who is participating. If you'd please mute your computers and phones, I'd appreciate it. Hearing no other comments from council members, is there a motion to direct the staff to develop a resolution to be voted on at our September meeting, confirming that the Grace Harbor Energy's purchase of allowances under the Climate Commitment Act will satisfy the company's obligations under the GHG plan that was approved by EFSEC in 2003 and include the two contingencies that we discussed today.
Lenny Young, so moved.
Thank you. Second?
Mike Livingston, second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? The motion is adopted. Thank you all. And thank you to all the presenters and to the staff for the complete record and documentation and work that went into this council item. Moving on to the Columbia Generating Station and WNP 1 and 4, Felicia Nahara Paxton.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew, EFSEC Council, and staff. For the record, this is Marshall Schmidt reporting for Columbia Generating Station and WNP 1 and 4. For July of this year, I have 3 items to report on. The first one, on July 11th, Energy Northwest received approval from EFSEC to investigate the tritium source that had been identified during the commissioning of our new surface water drinking facility, our treatment plant. The investigation was set to begin in mid-August. We're about 1 week into it right now. Once our investigation is concluded, we will furnish a report to EFSEC that identifies the amounts of activity of tritium that we found, a confirmation of the tritium source, the potential to move the intake structures downstream, and any information we have that we get by coordinating with the United States Department of Energy upon our completion of the plan. Our second item, on July 18th, we received a letter from EFSEC that directs Energy Northwest to repair or replace the runtime meters for 2 of our large emergency diesel generators. They were identified in April of this year as having a discrepancy in their runtime recording due to their design. We are currently conducting an engineering evaluation to determine the feasibility of correcting those meters. And finally, on July 21st, Energy Northwest received a response to the CGS air source registration as a draft for years 2020 and 2021. The response was accompanied by a review comment record, and we're utilizing that to respond to the comments and get them back to EFSEC and Ecology. Those are all of the updates that I have for July.
Are there any questions? Thank you. Are there any questions from council members? Okay, we look forward to further updates. Moving on to the Columbia Solar Project, Mr. Hurd.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew, council members, and EFSEC staff. This is Owen Hurd from Tuso Energy reporting on the Columbia solar projects. Penstemon is complete, currently operational, no change from last month. Camas is mechanically complete, but we're still working through some issues with some breakers that are tripping, which has been delaying substantial completion. We're hoping to resolve it this week. And then on Utica, we're in the final stages of the interconnection. We're working through some transformer issues prior to energization. I think we'll be at mechanical completion later this month, and then substantial completion to follow in September. We've submitted our revised planting plans to EFSEC staff, Department of Ecology, and WFW, and currently waiting feedback. And we'll be discussing this further with the TAC next week. We're holding our second meeting on next Tuesday. And then we'll also be meeting with the weed board shortly on site to talk through just routine maintenance plans for weed control and other. So that's it.
Thank you. I had the fortunate opportunity to walk through the Penstemon site last week, and which was great to see. A couple of questions for you, put you on the spot. You did mention the weed control, and perhaps there are some in the community who have questions about that as well. So just to bring that up, you have a plan that is in for review, and then as I hear, you're also going to discuss it in a TAC meeting next week.
That's correct. Yeah. And so unfortunately, when you were there, the skeleton weeds were still standing. So I guess it made the site look worse than it actually was because the weeds were dead. But so
they were clearly dead. Yes.
There was some discussion around how long we needed to leave the skeleton weeds there for it to really penetrate into the roots. And anyway, there's just a little bit of growing pains as we're kind of getting into the routine of when exactly things need to be done. But I think we're going to end up removing the skeleton weeds. There's some additional weeds, I think, that we found that were not hit on the western side of Camas that we're going to go back and hit. But yeah, that's right. And we've submitted this revised planting plan because we've got to get ground cover established, especially on Penstemon and on the eastern side of Utica. For now, the alfalfa is pretty good on Camas. But
thank you, and thanks for the update on that. My second question is, I was really pleased, which I didn't know before, or perhaps I didn't read the details, that at Penstemon, 2 megawatts of the power generated of the 5, Puget Sound Energy is including in its community solar project. And I don't know if the community is aware of that either, but I think that's a real value. So I wanted to share that and ask if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, it was kind of an interesting, I guess, aspect to that project is we essentially had to, there was a program cap, I guess there was a cap on project size. And so we essentially kind of created a sub project within the larger project that kind of met the requirements of the program. And now Puget Sound Energy is using that. And I believe that's their first site, but I'm not 100% sure for this community solar program.
But that goes directly into then the Kittitas County community. In the community solar program.
Yeah,
we can find out more information about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And share that, because I think those details are important for the community to know as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to our next item, the Horse Heaven Wind Farm, Ms. Moon.
Good afternoon, Council Chair Drew and council members. For the record, this is Amy Moon, EFSEC staff member, providing a State Environmental Policy Act update. We also shorten that to SEPA. The update is for the Horse Heaven Wind Project. In July, EFSEC staff continued reviewing and refining the draft environmental impact statement, and we shortened that to be the draft EIS. This included coordinating technical reviews with other Washington state agencies with emphasis on cultural resources, including our dialogue and coordination with the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, known as DAP, the acronym DAP, D-A-H-P, and the Yakima Nation technical staff. So we're working closely with the state agency DAP and then with the Yakima Nation, which is definitely an interested party in this project. EFSEC staff is focused on completing second and final draft reviews, refinement of draft EIS chapters, and the further development of proposed minimization and mitigation opportunities. Review and coordination with our consultant Golder will continue until all sections of the draft EIS are finalized and ready for compilation into a final document. Does the council have any questions?
Are there any questions from council members?
I just have one. This is Ed Brost. Is there a timing? Is there a timing on the draft being issued?
So we are working on a revised schedule, and I don't know if Amy Hofmeyer has an update on that. I do not have a revised schedule. There's a lot of moving parts that need to come together. Amy, do you have anything to update the council on that?
Thank you. For the record, this is Amy Hofmeyer. I don't have a revised schedule that we can share at this time. We are working with our contractor to update the schedule based on the remaining work, and then to also account for the time needed for making sure the document meets accessibility requirements, and for printing and distribution. We hope to have an updated working schedule in the near future, and we can share that.
So we will share that between council meetings when there's an update, so council members and the public will be aware of that.
Super, thanks.
Thank you.
Jared
Moving
Bruce
on. Go ahead.
It's Mike Livingston. Just one question on the consultation with tribes. It was mentioned that the Yakima Nation were being consulted, which is good. Also, that area is the ceded territory. Parts of it is the ceded territory of the Umatilla tribe as well. So I was just curious if there's been some discussions with them just to make sure all the due diligence is being covered.
Ms. Bumpus or Ms. Hofmeyer, I know we contacted them at the beginning of the project. Do you have any additional information?
Just a quick point of clarification. We have reached out to the Umatilla. We have not actually done government-to-government consultation with the tribes to this point. We have had our technical staff working with their technical staff, but actual consultation between the councils has not been established yet. We did receive feedback, I believe, earlier on from the Umatilla, but I would have to go back and look at what their comment letter said to know how far we are in working through those comments. Amy Moon might remember a little bit more of the details, but I do know that we reached out to them earlier on.
Yeah, we did reach out to them early on, and my recollection was they were wanting to see the draft EIS to comment on that, and I don't know anything beyond that point. I think that they were just waiting to comment on the draft EIS when it all comes together.
Thank you. So, Mr. Livingston, we will follow up, and when the draft EIS is out, make sure that contact is made again.
Great, thank you.
Moving on to the Goose Prairie solar update.
Hello, good afternoon, Chair Drew, EFSEC Council and staff. This is Joe Wood providing the monthly update for the 80 megawatt Goose Prairie Solar Project in Yakima County. EFSEC staff continues to work with Brookfield, the owner of Goose Prairie LLC, on pre-construction surveys and plans. Brookfield is working on finalizing a habitat conservation and mitigation plan along with EFSEC and DFW, as well as fine-tuning the cultural resources report and associated unanticipated discovery plan with both DAHP and the Yakima tribe. EFSEC will continue to work with Brookfield to obtain all required pre-construction and construction plans, and will update the council on progress at future meetings.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, moving on to Badger Mountain, Ms. Hofkemeyer.
Thank you, Chair Drew. Good afternoon, Council. For the record again, this is Amy Hofkemeyer. Staff have reviewed the comments received by the public during the 30-day SEPA scoping period that was open from March 14th to April 12th, 2022. We received 21 comments from public, state, and local agencies and tribes. Based on staff's review and the recommendations from our contractor, EFSEC has identified 5 elements of the environment that will be reviewed in the Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS, with full discussions. These elements are water resources, wetlands, vegetation, wildlife and habitat, historic and cultural resources, and transportation. The remaining elements will be discussed in the EIS with abbreviated discussions covering input from our contracted agencies and staff's review, summarizing impacts and proposed mitigation, or noting why more study is not warranted. Staff are now working with the applicant and our contractor to establish a working timeline for drafting the EIS. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions on the Badger Mountain Solar Energy Project? Hearing none, thank you. Whistling Ridge, Amy Hofkemeyer.
Thank you. EFSEC staff are waiting for the certificate holder to submit the remaining materials for the SCA amendment request, but there are no further updates at this time. We will keep council apprised as we receive more information.
Thank you. And then on to High Top and Ostria, Ms. Hofkemeyer.
Thank you. EFSEC staff continue to work with the applicant and contracted agencies for our review as we work towards a SEPA determination. We have initiated ongoing discussions with the applicant and DFW in particular to identify potential impacts and associated mitigation options for habitat connectivity. Are there any questions?
Any questions? Okay, thank you. And to the Watoma Solar Project, first of all, I would like to thank everybody who participated in our public informational meeting and land use hearing last week in person or via Microsoft Teams. And it was the first meeting we did in a hybrid configuration, and we have some lessons learned. Particularly about being able to film the speakers while they are speaking, which I know was a frustration to several of those of you who were watching from the Teams option virtually. And I'm happy to say that our very talented Andrea Grantham has combined the video that was taken in the room from the camera on site, which much of the time showed the videographer in the corner, but also has taken the information from the videographer in order to make a much better video of the meeting, and is on the Watoma page. So for those of you who are interested in watching the hearing in this better videographed way, it is on our website. But I really want to thank the staff and everybody who helped put that together, because this is new territory for us. So I think we're doing what we can to make sure people can participate, and like I said, we have lessons learned to improve in the future. So we will take those and improve going forward. With that, I'll turn over the update to Mr. Wood.
Yes, and thank you again. Good afternoon, Chair Drew, EFSEC, Council, and staff. This is again Joe Wood providing a monthly update for the proposed 470 megawatt Watoma solar project in Benton County, Washington. On August 8th, Interjex and EFSEC held a public informational meeting in Benton County regarding the project, and in addition held the initial land use consistence hearing. EFSEC received 17 written comments and 15 spoken comments regarding the informational meeting, and 1 written comment and 8 spoken comments regarding the land use consistence hearing. EFSEC staff continues to work with Interjex and relevant agencies to review the application and to identify any data gaps or outstanding questions that remain. EFSEC will continue to work with Interjex and relevant agencies, and will update the council on progress at future meetings. Any questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions? That concludes our business for today's meeting. Thank you all for your participation, and we look forward to our next meeting, and this meeting is adjourned.